There is a fictional island, somewhere off the coast of New England. It doesn't exist. Wes Anderson invented it. The geography, the wildlife, the weather patterns, even the historic storm that closes the film. He gave it a name, New Penzance, drew maps of it, populated it with lighthouses and coves and scout camps, and then set his entire film inside it. That single choice tells you almost everything you need to know about what Moonrise Kingdom actually is. Because this film isn't set in a real place. It's set inside the shape of a memory. Everything is a little too neat. The colors are too saturated, the uniforms fit too well. A narrator in a red coat wanders through the landscape explaining the weather like a museum docent. Nothing is presented the way it happened. Everything is presented the way it feels when you look back at it years later. Sharper, brighter, more organized than it ever actually could have been. Anderson isn't showing you 1965. He's showing you the emotional architecture of memory itself. And once you notice that, the film starts revealing what it's really about. The last moment in human life when love felt bigger than fear. And the strange, quiet grief of realizing that moment has passed. The film opens with a girl watching the world through binoculars. Her name is Susie Bishop. She's 12. She lives in a large, quiet house with parents who address each other as counselor and sleep in separate beds. She reads fantasy novels obsessively, carries around a suitcase full of stolen library books, and watches everyone around her through the wrong end of a lens. Because the actual house she lives in is a slow, quiet, emotional wasteland, and she'd rather observe the world than be ignored by it. Somewhere else on the island, a boy named Sam Shakuski is escaping from a scout camp. He's 12 too. He's an orphan. His foster family has quite literally sent a letter saying they don't want him back. His scout troop dislikes him. Every adult who describes him uses the word problem and stops there. But Sam isn't a problem child. He's a competent, thoughtful, meticulous person trapped in a system that has decided he's disposable. He builds shelters, paints watercolors, navigates by compass, fishes, cooks, and lights fires in the rain. He's more capable than most of the adults who spend the rest of the film searching for him. He's just small, and adults have a habit of confusing small with insignificant. The film's premise is simple enough that you could describe it in one sentence. Two 12-year-olds run away together, and everyone tries to find them. But underneath that premise is something much stranger and more serious. This is a film about two children who have already figured out, earlier than they should have, that the adults around them don't know how to love them properly, and who have quietly decided to try loving each other instead. Watch the way they meet. A church play, backstage. Sam wandering into the girls' dressing room. Susie dressed as a raven. He looks at her and simply says, "What kind of bird are you?" That's the entire beginning of their love story. No performance, no hesitation. Just a boy who noticed and a girl who noticed him back. 12 is the last age at which that kind of directness is possible without embarrassment. And Anderson knows it, and he protects that moment like it's the most fragile thing in the film. Because it is. They correspond by letter through the entire winter. They plan the escape for months. And when the film's present-day timeline begins, everything is already in motion. The children aren't discovering their feelings. They're executing a decision they made a long time ago. That's the first radical thing about Moonrise Kingdom. It takes children seriously. Not as comic relief, not as symbols of innocence, not as miniature adults for irony's sake. As people whose interior lives are as legitimate, as urgent, as reasoned, as worth respecting as any adults in the film. The strangest thing about this movie And the thing that took me multiple viewings to fully understand is that the peer world is more morally awake than the adult one. The khaki scouts, when we first meet them, are hostile towards Sam. They mock him. They shoot at him with arrows and pellet guns. They chase him through the woods with weapons. One of them stabs him with a pair of scissors. Another wounds his dog. They act out the cruelty that the adult world has quietly modeled for them, treating the problem child as an enemy, the outsider as a threat, the different one as prey. And then something extraordinary happens. Somewhere in the middle of the film, without any adult intervention, the scouts change their minds. They realize they were wrong about Sam. They defect from the search party. They help him and Susie escape. They lead them to Cousin Ben, a strange, almost mystical scout leader who takes the children with complete seriousness in a way no real adult in the film does. And then, in one of the most peculiar and quietly radical sequences in modern cinema, the scouts perform a small marriage ceremony for Sam and Susie. The ceremony is not a joke. Anderson doesn't play it for laughs. He treats it with the same gravity as any legal marriage. Because in the film's moral universe, it counts. The adults haven't given these two children anything real. Not attention, not love, not permission to exist. So the children give it to each other. They witness each other. They marry each other. And the film honors that witnessing as the most legitimate act of love in the entire story. That is the film's quiet argument. Goodness is not something adults teach children. Goodness is something children arrive at when they haven't yet been trained out of it. The scouts don't become kind because Scoutmaster Ward told them to. They become kind because, given enough time and enough distance from adult judgment, they figured out on their own that Sam was one of them. Every adult in this film has forgotten how to do that. The adults are the loneliest characters in the movie, and Anderson refuses to condescend to them. He doesn't paint them as villains. He paints them as wounded. Susie's parents, the Bishops, are the most devastating example. They don't fight loudly. They don't dramatize their unhappiness. They simply exist near each other, communicating through a megaphone, reading in silence, sleeping in separate beds. Susie's mother is having an affair with the island's police captain, a fact she doesn't try particularly hard to hide because she has stopped believing that hiding it would matter. Susie's father drinks alone at night, delivering one of the film's most brutal lines into the dark. I hope the roof flies off and I get sucked up into space. That line, delivered quietly in a film full of pastel wallpaper and khaki uniforms, is one of the most honest confessions of adult despair I have ever seen in a film marketed as whimsical. A man admitting he would rather disappear than continue the life he has built. And the fact that Anderson embeds it inside a children's adventure story is exactly the point. The whimsy is not hiding the pain. The whimsy is what makes the pain bearable enough to look at. And Susie's mother, quietly, in her own way, is the film's most heartbreaking adult. She isn't cruel, she isn't dramatic, she's just absent. She sends her children messages through a megaphone because she can't be bothered to walk into the room. She has an affair not out of passion, but out of a quiet, resigned belief that her real life is somewhere else, and that this one is a mistake she's still living inside. When she finally speaks honestly with Captain Sharp near the end of the film, she says something devastating. That she loves her husband, that she also loves someone else, and that both things are true, and that she doesn't know what to do about any of it. She isn't a bad mother. She's just a woman who stopped believing her own life would rescue her. That's why Susie reads fantasy novels. That's why she watches the world through binoculars. She learned early that in the house she grew up in, love is something people talk about like it's a case file, and attention is something you have to steal, not receive. Captain Sharp,
the police officer who becomes central to the ending, is the film's quiet redemption arc. He's a small-town cop who lives alone in a trailer, drinks in the evenings, and has never particularly become anyone. He stayed on the island. He never married. Somewhere along the way, he stopped expecting his life to mean anything. And then, almost accidentally, he meets Sam, a boy who has been discarded by every adult around him. And something in Captain Sharp wakes up. He recognizes himself in Sam. The loneliness, the invisibility, the sense of not quite belonging anywhere. And for the first time in maybe decades, he decides to be useful to someone else. When he offers to become Sam's foster father at the end of the film, the offer is not sentimental. It's earned. It's the quietest and most credible act of love in the entire story. Because Captain Sharp didn't rescue Sam. Sam rescued him by giving him someone to be responsible for, someone to actually show up for. It's an ending about a broken adult being repaired by a child who noticed him, which is, when you think about it, a startling thing for a film to argue. Now, about the storytelling itself, because Moonrise Kingdom is a masterclass in how to hide emotional weight inside stylistic restraint. Every frame in this movie is composed with almost mathematical precision. Objects centered, characters facing forward, camera moves that pan on rigid axes. It's the kind of visual style that people dismiss as precious or twee or cold. But watch what the symmetry actually does. It creates a doll's house feeling. Everything looks like it was placed by hand inside a memory box someone made after the fact. The precision isn't hiding emotion, it's containing it. Because when you show grief inside a perfectly composed frame, the grief feels bigger, not smaller. The tidiness makes the mess more visible. The narrator, standing at the edge of the frame in his red coat, is doing something similar. He doesn't belong to the story. He talks directly to the camera. He appears when he wants to and disappears without warning. But he's not a gimmick. He's the adult voice looking back. He's the memory keeper. He is the version of you who someday, decades from now, will try to explain what happened on that island and will realize the only way to describe it honestly is to make it sound like a fable. He is the film telling you gently that you are watching a story someone survived long enough to tell. And then there's the storm. The film has been telling you from its opening minutes that a historic flood is coming. Every scene is quietly ticking toward it. The narrator provides meteorological updates like a countdown. And when the storm finally arrives, it isn't just weather. It's the emotional pressure of the entire film breaking loose at once. The island floods. The church steeple cracks. Sam and Susie stand on the edge of a rooftop, holding hands, about to jump. And Captain Sharp, this quiet man who has spent decades not mattering to anyone, climbs up to save them. The storm isn't the crisis. The storm is the permission. The moment when everything the characters have been holding in finally becomes visible. Nature externalizes what the characters cannot say. That's classical dramatic structure, and Anderson just dressed it up in a khaki uniform and let the narrator explain the wind speed. And now the part that hurts. Because Moonrise Kingdom is really about a specific, universal moment in human life. The moment right before you learned to be embarrassed. There is a window in every person's life, usually around 11, 12, 13, when you felt things at full volume without knowing yet that you were supposed to hide them. You fell in love and you told them. You made plans and you believed in them. You wrote letters and you meant every word. You imagined running away from home and building a life in the woods with a fishing rod and a record player, and it did not occur to you that this was ridiculous. Because at that age, nothing that mattered to you had ever been ridiculed yet. And then something shifted. Someone laughed at you. A parent dismissed you. A friend betrayed a secret. The world, quietly and without ceremony, taught you that sincerity is dangerous. And you learned, over the following years, to armor yourself, to hedge, to hide, to say things you didn't quite mean so you couldn't be hurt for meaning them. Moonrise Kingdom is set in the last month before that armor forms. That's why it hits so hard when you watch it as an adult, because you remember that version of yourself, the one who wrote things you would be embarrassed to read now, the one who felt things you have since learned to downplay, the one who loved people with a conviction you have not quite matched since.
Anderson isn't romanticizing childhood. He's reminding us of a specific kind of courage we used to have. And quietly, without ever saying it directly, asking us, when did you stop? Watch the film again with that question in mind, and everything reorganizes. The adults aren't villains. They're just people who forgot. The bishops forgot how to speak honestly. Captain Sharp forgot how to hope. Scoutmaster Ward forgot how to be certain about anything. Even the social worker, a woman defined entirely by procedure, referred to only by her institutional title, has clearly forgotten that the children in her files are actually children. The children in this film are the only ones who remember. And the film's real tragedy is that they will, eventually, forget too. Sam and Susie don't ride into the sunset. They don't run off forever. By the end of the film, they are back inside the systems that failed them. Sam with his new foster father, Susie back home with her parents. The world does not let 12-year-olds run their own lives. It couldn't, and it shouldn't. But something has changed. They have been seen. And once you have been truly seen, even for one summer, even by one person, you can survive almost anything the world does to you afterward. The film ends with a painting. Sam is in Susie's bedroom, having climbed through the window the way he has all summer. He is finishing a small watercolor of the cove where they first camped together, the place they called Moonrise Kingdom. The cove doesn't exist anymore. Not really. The storm washed away the sign they made. The location has been renamed by adults. The moment has passed. But the painting exists, and Sam is finishing it, quietly, without ceremony, before Captain Sharp calls him home for dinner. He didn't stay with her. He can't. But he found a way to hold on to what happened. He painted it. He preserved it. He made it a place you could return to, even after the place itself was gone. That is what memory is. That is what art is. That is what this entire film is. A painting of a place that existed for one summer, on an island that isn't real, between two children who won't stay children. Made by a filmmaker who was once 12 himself, who remembers exactly what it felt like, and who refused to let the world convince him it didn't matter. So here is what I would leave you with. Somewhere in your past, there is a version of you who felt things without apologizing for them, who wrote things down, who made plans that sounded ridiculous, who loved someone with a certainty you have been quietly chasing ever since. Moonrise Kingdom is not asking you to become that person again. You can't. Nobody can. The armor exists for real reasons, and pretending it doesn't would be its own kind of dishonesty. But the film is asking you to remember that person, to honor them, to sit for 94 minutes inside a beautifully composed frame and admit, quietly, to yourself, in the dark, that you used to be braver than you are now. And maybe, if you were honest about it,
and lucky and paying attention, you could be again.